My name is Phyllis. I'm sitting in my car, watching as my parents, Robert and Margaret, stand forlornly by the driveway of the mountain lodge, their faces etched with despair. It's the 30th day since I sent them the notice to vacate, and the county officers are here to enforce it. The lodge, once a symbol of family and warmth, now stands empty, its rooms filled with the ghosts of our shattered relationships. I remember the moment it all changed, the moment that shattered the illusion of a loving family. It was Christmas Eve, and we were gathered around the dinner table, pretending to be a happy, united family. I was carrying a tray of warm cider glasses through the crowded dining room, trying not to bump into anyone. But then, a chair scraped back behind me, and someone stepped into my path. I lost my balance, and my shoulder brushed against my brother Ethan's expensive jacket. A few drops of cider splashed onto his sleeve. That was all it took. In an instant, Ethan's hand struck my face, the sound echoing through the silent room. The shock and pain were overwhelming, but I refused to cry. I stood there, my hand pressed against my burning cheek, looking at the people I had loved and protected for so long. But instead of support or compassion, I saw only coldness and indifference. Margaret rushed to Ethan, not to check on me, but to dab his sleeve with a napkin. Robert looked at me with a coldness I had long ignored, and then he said, "Apologize to your brother or get out." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had spent my entire life sacrificing for this family, and this was how they repaid me. Without a word, I placed the tray down, turned towards the front door, and walked out into the freezing Christmas night. The cold air hit me like a punch in the gut, but it was nothing compared to the pain in my heart. As I drove down the mountain road, the Christmas lights disappeared behind me in the rearview mirror, and for the first time in years, I felt free. I thought about the sacrifices I had made for this family. 5 years ago, Robert's real estate business had collapsed after a failed luxury hotel project. He was on the verge of bankruptcy, and the family was facing financial ruin. I stepped in and bought the mountain lodge they were living in, allowing them to tell their friends that Robert had simply downsized his investments. I paid off the tax liens and covered the overdue mortgage. I also invested in Ethan's chain of high-end dental clinics because Margaret kept insisting he only needed one real chance to prove himself. But Ethan was lazy, cruel, and reckless with money. He was always asking for emergency transfers, and Margaret always sided with him, calling me dramatic whenever I questioned his actions. She called him gifted and misunderstood, while I was the one who was always made to feel like the problem. By the time I reached my apartment in New York, the pain in my face had faded, but the anger and betrayal were still burning inside me. I walked straight into my office, opened the wall safe behind a framed photograph, and took out the documents I had hoped I would never need. The first folder held the deed to the lodge. My name was the only one on it. The second folder held the agreement that allowed my parents and Ethan to live their rent-free as long as they respected basic conduct terms. The third folder held the business investment contract for Ethan's clinics, which included a clause that allowed immediate review, account suspension, and loan recall if he committed misconduct, fraud, or any act that damaged the reputation of the investor. I called my lawyer, Henry. He answered on the third ring, his voice calm and professional. I told him what had happened, about the slap, the witnesses, and the fact that I had been ordered out of a home I owned. When I finished, he asked, "Are you ready to enforce the agreements?" I looked at the folders under my hand and felt a sense of finality. "Yes," I said. "Prepare the notice to vacate. Suspend Ethan's access to every business account tied to my funding. Freeze the company credit cards. Start a forensic audit. And have everything delivered at 8 o'clock in the morning." The next morning, a black delivery van rolled through the snow-covered driveway of the mountain lodge, carrying a box wrapped in deep red paper with a gold ribbon. From the outside, it looked like a Christmas gift. Ethan found it first, opening the front door in his robe, probably expecting an expensive apology from me. I watched the silent footage from my desk as he picked up the box, turned it around, and carried it inside with his usual confidence. But this box was not a gift. It was a warning. Inside was a formal notice ending their right to live in the lodge, giving them 30 days to vacate. Beneath that was a letter from Henry announcing the immediate review of every dollar invested in Ethan's dental clinics. Under that was a notice suspending his company credit cards, administrative access, and investor-backed credit line pending a forensic audit. The USB drive in the box contained security footage from the dining room camera that Ethan never realized was connected to the lodge system I paid for. The video showed him slapping me, yelling at me, and my parents' callous reactions. And at the bottom of the box was a small stack of invoices marked with yellow tabs, just enough to let Margaret know I had started looking. 11 minutes after the package was opened, my phone began vibrating. First Robert, then Margaret, then Ethan, then Robert again. I let every call ring until it died. A minute later, Ethan tried to use his company card to order a last-minute luxury watch online. The fraud alert came straight to the dashboard my friend, Lily, had helped me set up. Declined. Then he tried a second card. Declined. Then he tried to log into the clinic management portal. Suspended pending audit. The panic in the lodge was palpable. Ethan paced the living room, shouting into his phone. Margaret sat at the dining table, the invoice copies spread in front of her, one hand pressed to her mouth. Robert kept reading the lodge notice again and again, as if the words might change if he stared long enough. 2 days after Christmas, I sat in a glass conference room at my office with Lily across from me. She had been my closest friend since college, but in that room, she was a forensic accountant, showing me the ugly truth. The list of vendor payments from Ethan's clinics was a web of fraud. Half of the vendors did not exist. Some addresses led to empty office suites, some tax numbers were fake, and some invoices repeated the same language with different amounts. Payments labeled emergency dental equipment had been redirected to Ethan's personal accounts. Renovation funds had been used at casinos, luxury hotels, and online gambling platforms. Patient refund reserves had been drained, and insurance reimbursements had been moved into shell accounts. He had not been struggling, he had been stealing. And then, Lily opened a smaller folder. "Phyllis, this part is going to hurt," she said quietly. Inside were authorization forms for several large transfers that should never have been approved. At the bottom of each one was Margaret's signature. She had not just ignored Ethan's actions, she had helped him hide them. I was devastated. The slap at Christmas had been humiliating, but this was a long-term betrayal. I had trusted my family, and they had used me as a bank. I told Lily to keep going and prepare everything in a clean evidence file. Then I called Henry and told him we were no longer dealing with a family dispute, we were dealing with crimes. 3 days later, the front desk called my office to say there was a disturbance in the lobby. I knew it was Ethan, Robert, and Margaret. I stepped out onto the balcony overlooking the lobby and saw them below. Robert was standing near the security desk, speaking loudly about how I had abandoned my family at Christmas. Margaret had one hand on her chest, looking like she was about to faint. Ethan paced behind them, his hair messy, his coat half-buttoned, his face pale. I instructed security to bring them to the executive conference room. When they entered, they found me seated at the head of the table. Henry sat to my right with a recording device, and Lily sat to my left with a laptop open and the evidence file ready. Robert started, using his stern tone. "Phyllis, this has gone far enough. You're punishing your mother on Christmas week because of one argument." I looked at him without blinking. "One argument?" I asked. Margaret immediately began crying, saying she had barely slept, that the lodge felt like a prison, and that neighbors were asking questions. Ethan slammed both hands on the table and shouted, "Stop playing games and turn the accounts back on. I need access today." His desperation filled the room. Robert turned to him sharply, as if only then realizing his son was afraid of something. I pressed a button, and the screen behind me lit up. First came the video from Christmas dinner. The slap, the silence, Margaret cleaning Ethan's sleeve, and Robert ordering me to leave. No one spoke while it played. Then I showed the lodge deed, the signed occupancy agreement, and the investment contract. Ethan looked away, and Robert's jaw tightened. Margaret whispered my name, as if she wanted to stop me before I reached the part she feared most. I continued, and Lily brought up the fake invoices one by one. The longer the slides continued, the smaller my family looked. Ethan tried to say I had misunderstood the business, but Lily calmly explained that the audit trail was clear. Margaret tried to say she signed what Ethan put in front of her because she trusted him. Henry asked whether she wanted to make that statement formally on record, and she stopped crying immediately. Robert leaned forward, his voice weaker. "Phyllis, please. We can handle this privately. This is a family matter." I stood up. "No," I said. "A family matter is forgetting a birthday. A family matter is arguing over dinner. Fraud is not a family matter. Embezzlement is not a family matter. Assaulting me in front of witnesses is not a family matter." I placed two options on the table. They could leave the lodge within the remaining notice period, return all company property, cooperate fully with the audit, and stop contacting my employees. Or, Henry would deliver the evidence file to the Economic Crimes Unit before the end of the day. Ethan leaned toward me and whispered that I had no idea who I was dealing with. I looked at him and said, "For once, Ethan, neither do you." The next week, the lodge became a place of chaos. Ethan spent most of his time locked in his room, arguing on the phone. Robert paced the halls, looking for a loophole in the legal notice. Margaret moved through the kitchen like a ghost, sometimes crying, sometimes defending Ethan. One night, Ethan stole from his parents. He took the cash from their retirement savings, Robert's anniversary watch, Margaret's diamond earrings, and a folder of personal identification papers. He left a note saying he was sorry and would pay it back. On the 30th day, the county officers and the property team arrived. I came 20 minutes later and parked near the front gate. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. I watched as Robert and Margaret stood there, their faces full of despair. Robert knocked on my passenger window, saying, "Phyllis, please. Your brother took everything. We have nowhere to go." Margaret stood behind him, crying into her gloves. I kept my hands on the steering wheel and didn't lower the window. Henry stepped between Robert and the car, holding a folder and a small card. He explained that temporary housing information, storage details, and a basic relocation stipend had been arranged from funds not connected to Ethan's companies. Robert looked at the card like it insulted him, and Margaret asked if I could at least speak to her. I looked at her through the glass and remembered all the times she had sided with Ethan, all the times she had betrayed me. I didn't speak. The gates opened, and I drove forward. In the rearview mirror, I watched them shrink against the snow with their bags at their feet. They had chosen Ethan over me every time, and in the end, Ethan had chosen himself over them. 3 months later, Ethan was arrested in a motel parking lot 2 states away while trying to sell Margaret's jewelry. The evidence file had grown, and the audit had connected all the dots of his fraud. I sold the lodge to a hospitality group for far more than I had originally paid. I used part of the money to expand a fund for women starting small businesses in healthcare, technology, and professional services. I wanted to teach them to protect themselves, to understand contracts, ownership, and boundaries. My life is quieter now. I have friends who care about me, and I have work that matters. I no longer feel the weight of my family's expectations. Peace is a strange feeling after so long of chaos, but it's the sound of my own life finally belonging to me. So, if you're listening and someone in your life keeps hurting you, remember this: forgiveness doesn't require access. Kindness doesn't require surrender. Love doesn't require you to stand still while someone destroys you. Sometimes, walking away is the first act of self-respect.